Good evening. I'd like to call the Planning Commission meeting for September 10th, 2019 to order. Can we begin with a roll call, please?
Chair Tagney?
Here.
Vice Chair Mayer?
Here.
Commissioner Ryman? Here. Commissioner Barstow?
Here.
Commissioner Visade-Elcock?
Here.
And Commissioner White?
Here.
All present.
Thank you. And we're joined at the staff table this evening by Community Development Director David Loya and Senior Planner Joe Mateer. And we'll move on now to oral communications. The meeting is now open for communications from the public for items that are not on tonight's agenda. Any items that require any action by the Commission will be set for an agenda at a later date.
Not on the agenda.
Not on the agenda. Okay.
Right.
Is that you?
Yep.
Okay.
I also have something on the agenda later.
Okay, not on the agendas
I
now.
sort of figured these out. My name is Linda Dirksen. My husband Jan and I live at the Arcata Lazy J Ranch Senior Mobile Home Park. I'm here tonight to ask you to please put zoning for a senior mobile home park overlay district on your agenda as soon as possible. Such zoning would prohibit conversion of Arcata's only senior mobile home park, the Lazy J Ranch, to an all-age family park. More than 22 California jurisdictions have adopted zoning for senior mobile home park overlay district, including Hayward, Yucaipa, Huntington Beach, Fremont, San Jose, and Sunnyvale. We bring this request to your attention now because this senior mobile home park overlay district is closely related to the other mobile home zoning issue that is on your agenda tonight, the mobile home park exclusive overlay zone. The Arcata housing element indicates that there is not enough affordable housing for low-income seniors. As the number of seniors increases in the coming years, the lack of affordable senior housing will be exacerbated. The Lazy J provides spaces for 220 senior households. Thus, is this cutting out? I don't know.
It's going fine.
Okay. Thus, it is doubly important that the city protect the 220 spaces at the Lazy J as market rate, affordable housing for seniors with low or moderate incomes. It's easy for a park owner to change a park from senior to family. We ask you to put the Senior Mobile Home Park Overlay District on your agenda as soon as possible. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Anybody else for items not on the agenda?
Anderson, I live in the Lazy J. I want to second what Linda said, and you should understand that it would be really disastrous for everybody in that mobile home park if they did convert it to an all-age park, because it's a senior park. We do have children there, but it's mainly a senior park, and it is a community of older people who help each other. We all have an investment in that park, and we need to be included in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else for items not on tonight's agenda? And let me just point out that I feel like we're going to be discussing most of exactly what I've heard so far. I understand there's some nuance, and it's going to take some staff support for us to understand the nuance. However, tonight's business item is all about the mobile home park, and the letter that was just read is in our packet. So we have received this information. If there's anybody else with anything that's not on tonight's agenda.
Hi, my name is Hillary Mosier. I'm the regional manager for the Golden State Manufactured Homeowners League, and I'm just talking here specifically about the senior overlay, because that's the part I think is not on the agenda, but it's great if you could put it on. This is a kind of relatively new and unique designation, and it comes out of the state of California admonition, if you will, of making sure that communities have adequate housing for seniors, especially low-income seniors. And this is an opportunity for a very simple overlay. I don't think it's really complicated. I don't see anybody here from the mobile home park industry saying, no, don't do it, it'll be terrible. It's for one park, and I really encourage you guys to think seriously about adopting it. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, we will move on our agenda to our consent calendar. And we only have one item on our consent calendar this evening, which is to approve the Planning Commission minutes from our regular meeting on August 27th, 2019.
I have one thing on that. Was Kristen here? Or she was already off? She wasn't absent. She was just not on anymore, right? On August 27th?
That's absolutely correct. That's a good catch. So if you want to make that amendment, we'll change it in the record.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of August 27th with that correction.
I second that motion.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Unanimous. Okay, now we can move on to our first public hearing item for the evening. Which is to adopt a resolution PC 1905 recommending the City Council amend the land use code adding a mobile home park combining zone to various mobile home parks. Can we have a staff report, please?
Yes, good evening, Commission. The item before you tonight is a recommendation to the City Council to amend the land use code, adding an overlay zone, or what we refer to as combining zones in our code, to specifically identify several mobile home parks throughout the city that would then have exclusive mobile home park zoning, which would essentially translate into that those properties could only be used for primarily mobile home park. It would not exclude accessory uses like if there was a store that served a park or a laundry facility that served a park, but it would make it such that in the zoning code there was a specific zoning type for mobile home parks, and it would put one more measure in place to preserve those existing mobile home parks. It would be combined with the closure and conversion ordinance, which is not a land use code ordinance. Closure and conversion has been considered by the City Council for a number of months now, and we're prepared to come back with both this ordinance, if recommended by the Planning Commission, and a closure and conversion ordinance as sort of a paired protection measures for mobile home parks in October. Probably the second meeting in October at the City Council if this passes tonight. The important elements that you should be aware of, and I know you've received public comment, which we were not able to, we didn't receive it in time to include it in the packet, but we forwarded it to the commissioners, and we'll ensure that the record is updated to include these communications. But there was a call to change the staff recommendation to include Arcata Trailer Court. Currently, the staff recommendation is that all of the parks in town, the existing parks in town, be included in this combining zone, apart from the Arcata Trailer Court. Arcata Trailer Court is located on 7th and K. It's right in the Arcata Gateway corridor, Arcata Gateway specific area plan, and it's sort of a target for infill redevelopment. I think that we're looking at measures that would include strong provisions for replacement housing for existing affordable housing that gets converted in that plan. And so we can talk about that in more detail at your interest. But the recommendation at this point, based on discussions with the community and my read on where we're going with policy, is to not include our Arcata Trailer Court. but the rest of them should be included in this zoning. Now, the zoning overlay was initiated by City Council when they first reviewed the closure and conversion ordinance. Just to give a little bit of context on what these two documents would do, these two ordinances would do, and how they work together. The zoning essentially puts a limitation on the types of uses, and that would be codified in our zoning ordinance. It would be paired with, and you'll see in the findings that are required to change a overlay zone through a zone amendment of one of these parks, is that it would be paired with the closure and conversion ordinance. And one of the findings that has to be made in order to remove this zoning type from one of these parks would be that they've received the city council approval for, for that closure and conversion ordinance. The closure and conversion ordinance has all kinds of measures that are directed at ensuring, number one, that the closure or conversion that's being proposed comports with various state standards that are that closure and conversion ordinance derives its authority from, including the Subdivision Map Act. And it also includes provisions that would require a closure and conversion impact report that would outline and detail the financial impact on the residents and what measures could be done to provide a relocation benefit. The details of that are still being fleshed out at the policy level with the City Council. And so we don't have that before you tonight to show you specifically how those are paired, but they work in concert to ensure that both a land use and a financial analysis are done before any park would be able to be converted away from mobile home use once it has this overlay on top of it. I'll close my staff report. I assume there are many people here who want to speak tonight, so I'll keep this brief and leave any outstanding questions that you may have to your deliberations. But I do want to close the staff report by pointing out that we had one very astute reader point to some errors that were in the resolution, and I wanted to draw your attention to those. So if you adopt this tonight, that you'll be able to make these corrections. First, in the first recital on packet page 7, the word represent has a hyphen that should be removed. That's in the resolution. The commenter had suggested several changes. I'll address a couple of those that are recommended for revision within the draft ordinance, and then some that we recommend not changing, and then I'll leave some of the other to your discretion to ask why we would or wouldn't change. On packet page 11, under section 9.28140, the purpose, A, the first sentence reads, the MP combining zone is applied to sites and areas identified in figure 2-23, and the intention would have been to incorporate exhibit 1 from the ordinance into the land use code as figure 2-23. Instead, what I'm going to recommend, so that we don't have another graphic in the body of the land use code, that we adopt this language here, which is to essentially name the parks. So to strike sites and areas identified in figure 2-23 and insert instead the following mobile home parks, Town and Country Mobile Home Village, Lazy J Ranch, Valley West Manufactured Home Community, and Arcata Mobile Home Park and Sandpiper Mobile Home Park. So we've specified specifically what those parks are in the code, recognizing that this may be paired with APN information if it seems like the appropriate thing to do when we get to the council level. So that's how we're suggesting handling this. Instead of giving the figure that would have been Exhibit 1 in the ordinance and embedding that in the land use code, just identifying the park names and the purpose. We did have a an error in the applicability section. B, again, this is on packet page 11. We had recognized in the purpose section that the mobile home parks are currently zoned, some of them residential high, some of them residential medium, and intended to apply that throughout the ordinance, but this one section, it was left off. And so we're recommending that we add that back in, and residential medium in the applicability.
But in the first paragraph, after any,
I'm sorry.
after action, you need to include the word to.
I'm sorry. This is a staff report section, and then the Planning Commission will do deliberations, and then there'll be an opportunity for public input.
Please just return to that item when you have an opportunity at the mic. Okay. It's just our protocol. Thank you.
Then finally, in the findings section, there's under number 5, and this is on packet page 12, under the first finding, this should have read mobile home parks and not mobile homes. So it should read that all subject parcels are currently operated as mobile home parks. There were some other recommendations for changes, and again, we can address those if you've had time to review those. The commenters may bring some of those changes up, and I'd be happy to address any comments that you have on those. I'm sorry, one more change on packet page 14, the Exhibit 1 to the ordinance. First, commenter noted that this says combing, not combining. Clearly, we intended to have it read combining. And then there was a recommendation to add addresses and APN, which I thought was a great suggestion. So we'll be revising the ordinance, if you accept this recommendation, to include park name, park APN, and park address on this map that gets codified. I guess the one other point that I'll make that may be lost on sort of many people is that when this ordinance, the Planning Commission is adopting a resolution. The resolution has a draft of the ordinance as an attachment to the resolution. The ordinance has both the language that's shown in the packet pages 10 through 13, and then attached to that is Exhibit 1 to the ordinance, shown on packet page 14. That's this exhibit. When that ordinance is adopted, that effectuates, when it becomes effective, that effectuates this zoning change. And so regardless of whether this is identified as a figure within the land use code or whether it's included or by reference at all, the zoning that is created by this ordinance is then in effect, and those parcels actually have that overlay on them. So I just wanted to be real clear about that regardless of how this map is adopted, it has the same effect of changing the zoning on the parcels that it affects. So with that, I'll close my staff report, answer any questions that you have, and then encourage you to accept public comment on this matter.
David, it says combing in the black box down below there, too.
Thank you for pointing that out, too. We'll make sure and change that.
Okay, are there any commission questions of staff?
I have questions.
Go ahead.
Okay. I just have a lot of questions, just clarifications, I guess. So we don't have the ordinance 1515, which is the conversion, closing and conversion, but we're kind of being asked to vote on it, sort of. And
No, you're not. The closure and conversion ordinance is a document that will be wholly within the municipal code outside of Title IX.
Okay.
The Planning Commission doesn't have purview over those municipal code changes unless the council asks the Planning Commission for their review of it.
And they haven't asked us.
And they have not asked that. Yeah,
We're
they're
just
trying.
recommending approval of this. But is it similar to the wording on the bottom of page 11, probably?
The ordinance is, actually, the closure and conversion ordinance is much more complex and much larger than this zoning ordinance. The way I would describe it, I guess, to you is that the zoning ordinance is kind of like the cherry on top. The zoning ordinance puts one more process that anyone wanting to convert a mobile home park from its current use to another use in that process. So it adds a final step that they would have to do. The closure and conversion has, much more documentation and process associated with it. And so essentially this is a companion, and it gives additional protection that's above and beyond the much stronger protections that are offered by the closure and conversion ordinance.
Okay, so we weren't asked to look at that then.
That's right.
So on the Arcata trailer park, I assume that's grandfathered in because it obviously doesn't meet any developmental standards. So why is that not included in here? Because by not including it, it almost violates the housing element several sections because it's really affordable. What are you going to do with that? And how come it's not included in here exactly?
So the Arcata trailer court is located on the Arcata Gateway corridor. The plan for that area is absolutely to include strong policies for affordable housing creation. And that site in particular, as you said, doesn't meet any of the zoning requirements, the site standards.
Yeah.
And many of the units that are currently located on that site are fairly substandard in terms of housing condition. The site has much higher potential for housing development and currently is very underutilized as a mobile home park. And so while it's true, it's hyper affordable housing, if you will, many of the people that are living there are living inside of RVs. And so the intent behind not including it is because we have another plan in place that's running concurrently with this ordinance amendment that has a different plan for that particular property. And so to make it harder to convert that from mobile home park to some other use, when we have another plan that's ongoing right now that says, yes, let's convert it to another use, and that's in the early planning stages at this point, those two run afoul of each other. Now, in terms of how does this comport with the general plan, and does it conflict with the general plan, I would argue no, absolutely not, it does not, because there are other general plan policies in place currently, and we're developing new general plan policies that will be adopted in the future that would support the development of that site as, redevelop it for higher density housing. Not every project is going to comport with every single general plan policy, and there's, generally speaking, on any project, you're going to be able to find some general plan policy that, is, if not directly, at least tangentially, somewhat in conflict with what the proposal is. And so we have to balance these general plan policies. And the, I guess the staff recommendation at this point is that we don't include that specific property in this zoning so that we can include it in another plan, another zoning that would allow for a higher and better use of that potential property. Certainly within the purview of the Planning Commission to make a recommendation to the City Council to include it. And then at the end of the day, it's a policy decision that the City Council will make.
Okay. Thank you.
Could I ask a quick question on that same lines? Just to clarify, so if it is going to be exempt, am I to understand that those folks will be relocated if they meet the criteria of low income? And that if they're the replacement housing that does happen, 15% will be set aside for folks that meet low income? Am I confused on that, or is that?
I don't think you're confused. I think that you're 10 steps ahead, I guess is what I would say.
Okay.
We don't currently have those policies in place outside of the coastal zone. Though you are hinting at some of the policy decisions that I think we're going to need to make, I don't know that we can, tie replacement housing directly to a site, but that's something that we should explore. And then certainly, and that is in terms of the, the strategic plan that we're working on now. Now, the closure and conversion ordinance, it has not yet been adopted. But even though it hasn't been adopted, if this site was, converted from mobile home, it's currently a mobile home, it's got a permit with HCD, it's, noted as a mobile home park in our regulations. If they were to convert that from mobile home park now, there are two pieces of government code that would require some different levels of investment in evaluating the economic impact to those residents and providing some relocation benefit. And what our closure and conversion ordinance is intended to do is to pull together both that body of state law, adopt it locally, but then also develop some procedures to outline exactly what the process looks like for the city of Arcata. Many jurisdictions have done this. They've already adopted closure and conversion ordinances, and they're well supported in case law. And so we're definitely pursuing that as a companion to this. Now, what level of relocation benefit is still a matter of, point of discussion. We're trying to evaluate what can we legally require, and whether that falls short of or goes beyond, what our policy or matches what our policy desire is.
So to understand, then those things still need to be hashed out, and are we making a decision as to whether it will be exempt without those details then?
Yeah, to super simplify, this ordinance will not create replacement housing. We're looking at expanding replacement housing options in a number of different areas, the strategic plan and the closure and conversion ordinance. And there's already provisions in state law, and we'll also incorporate those provisions into our closure and conversion ordinance for relocation benefit. But that's not under your purview tonight, the relocation benefit aspects.
Jumped ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Seeing into the future.
Yes, please.
I have a question on that same topic that Kim was talking about. The 15% rate of the call for replacement low-income housing seems low to me, but and it might be irrelevant because, as you say, the other ordinance hasn't been hashed out yet. So maybe this whole D2 paragraph shouldn't be in this ordinance if it hasn't been decided yet.
I'm sorry, I'm not being clear. We're kind of mixing apples and oranges. The conversion ordinance is going to create a relocation benefit for the residents that live there. What this does, it doesn't affect the people. What D2 does is changes the, or requires that the owner who's wishing to convert either creates replacement housing of 15% of the units on site or pays an in lieu fee to create replacement housing somewhere else. But that doesn't mean replacement housing for those individuals who are living on the site. So this ordinance is recommending that we add a provision for starting to capture some replacement housing. We started at 15% in the coastal zone. It's 100%. So it's certainly your purview whether you recommend that be a higher percentage. But it wouldn't affect the current residents. By the time that project was built, let's say they were going to convert the mobile home park into condos. In 5 years, when those condos are built, the people who were displaced 5 years ago, they've already found new homes. And so what this replacement housing So I'm sorry, the decorum in this forum is really requires that we allow everyone to have their say. You may think that something that staff is saying doesn't measure up to your thoughts, or you may think that someone who comes to speak it doesn't, that you don't agree with them, but the decorum in this forum requires that you not laugh at people, please. I can take it, but I'm concerned about other people who may want to speak on the matter.
Please keep your comments down now. Thank you. Sorry, David.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the question.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So this provision would require 15% of the lost units to be replaced in one way or another. And I'm still wondering why 15%. That seems kind of low. I think if the situation actually occurred that whatever new units were created would probably vastly outnumber the number that were lost. So 15% just seems a little stingy.
Right. I guess 15% was in addition to, this goes above and beyond the relocation benefit that's included in the closure and conversion ordinance. And I certainly think that the Planning Commission should make a recommendation on that. If 15% seems like it's too low, you should certainly recommend something higher. Staff didn't recommend a 100% replacement housing because it is, in a sense, doubling the doubling the ask on replacement housing. The closure and conversion ordinance will require that the residents that are there now get assistance to find new housing, and so the 100% of the units that are now units are going to receive some sort of relocation benefit. This is an additional ask, and what staff tried to do was to start with something that seemed like it would be reasonable and have nexus for an additional ask on top of that 100% relocation benefit that they also add to replacing that affordable housing. Certainly within the specific area plan, the concepts will be that the concepts that we're floating are that, if you, for example, include 15% of the units that are being built out on the site to start with, if those are affordable units, then that's one of the, measures that you could check off to try and get closer to that principally permitted pathway and be able to, build something on one of these sites in this specific area that, without having a planning review. And so the concept here was that if someone was to convert a mobile home park somewhere else in the city, or if they happen to convert one that was in that specific area plan, that there's a revenue source for creating that new affordable housing, in addition to the relocation benefit that they'd be required to do per our ordinance.
Okay, I guess I'm still stuck on the 15% thing. What was the rationale in the coastal zone for making it 100%?
That's a state law, and that is not, in the coastal zone, the way it works is that the jurisdiction is responsible for ensuring that there's replacement housing. The individual property owner is not. And so if the jurisdiction allows the demolition of affordable units, they are then on the hook for replacing those affordable units within the coastal zone somewhere else. And so it's kind of an unfunded mandate in a sense. By us including this in our zoning ordinance, we're essentially creating, passing that requirement on to the private property owner that is looking to, basically convert the property away from mobile home.
Thank you.
Okay, next.
Yeah, I have several questions. First, is it correct that the city's moratorium on mobile mobile home park conversion will remain in force until the city council adopts the ordinance that they're asking us to advise them on today?
That's a really good question. The mobile home moratorium, the conversion moratorium, is in place for 24 months from the date of the first urgency ordinance adoption. If we do not get an ordinance adopted within that time frame, then that moratorium falls off, but we would likely adopt a new moratorium. So it's not until this is in place. If this is in place beforehand, then we would likely negate the moratorium, this and the conversion and closure ordinance. So yeah, we're starting the process early in the moratorium period to try and ensure that we have plenty of time to work through the policy issues before we run out of time on the moratorium.
Okay. In your opinion, is the issue of a senior mobile home park aspect to the proposed mobile home park overlay zone an issue that is included on our agenda today?
I think that, yeah, it's similar enough to the topic that you could talk about those alternatives today.
Okay, I guess the clarification I'm wondering about is when I was going through the material in our packet today with regard to this ordinance, I actually went back to the City Council's Ordinance 1514 on rent stabilization in mobile home parks, because I wanted to look for those legal definitions for the City of Arcata of mobile home park and mobile home. And that became kind of important when I was wondering how inclusive the proposed ordinance would be, and whether it might make a lot of sense to consider a more inclusive ordinance and to do it in conjunction with the ongoing housing element update that the city is working on right now. Part of the reason, and I guess I'm wondering if the current conversion moratorium stays in place for 24 months or until the City Council adopts an ordinance like the one that we're considering today, is there actually an opportunity here to broaden it and to discuss those broader considerations in conjunction with the housing element update and the strategic infill planning process? I guess what I'm scared of is that, I'll give an example with the definitions that we have here. The definition of mobile home and mobile home park could be considered to preclude things like other manufacturing small house types, tiny homes. Realistically, most of those dwellings in most of the mobile home parks that we're concerned about aren't moving without serious damage or great cost. And if we use this language and these definitions, we may actually be failing to protect dwellings and people that we would like to protect. And we won't have a chance to discuss that now because we already will have recommended the language in this ordinance. Is it possible that this item could actually be considered in conjunction with our broader housing plan update?
I mean, yeah, it's possible. I'm having a really hard time understanding what specifically to address in terms of what the policy ramifications are, but the simple answer to your question is yes. You can defer decision on this until such time as you feel you have enough deliberations to make a recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
I had a quick question. I think it's piggybacking on Judith's question, and it may have nothing to do with this, but I was thinking about some of these older mobile homes that you can't take apart because you just can't, and they're too old. Didn't we used to have a program some time ago that was a grant that allowed the removal of these older mobile homes and then a loan to put in place a pre-manufactured home? And is that still a thing? And is it even relevant? I was just wondering, because I was thinking about all these old mobile homes.
I feel like there's a thread that I'm just really not getting here because we're talking about mobile homes themselves here. Is the concern that if a park converts to another use, that those mobile homes won't be able to be moved, and so then we need to identify? Okay, Judy is shaking her head no. The quick answer to your question.
Standard living is what I was thinking of.
Quick answer to your question is no, we don't have a program like that currently. We do have a home ownership program. We've used our home ownership program on mobile homes before at the Sandpiper Mobile Home Park. Theoretically, if we did a loan for a mobile home, it's possible to include the removal costs of an existing mobile home in a mobile home park. But that doesn't really tie to this ordinance.
Entirely separate.
Yeah.
Right. It's not going to preclude any of improvements or removal per se of individual mobile homes. Just the park itself is going to be protected.
Yes, exactly. And so they could not convert the use of a park that's currently being used as a mobile home park. And the conversion ordinance actually has some thresholds, excuse me, not just for a conversion of a use. And so right now it's a mobile home park and you come and you tell me I want to put up a high rise. It also has provisions for if the vacancy drops below a certain rate so that they're, effectively converting the park by allowing it to go vacant. That there are some triggers for that as well. So.
Okay, Mike?
Just in terms of, I believe I read that there is already rent stabilization for the mobile homes limited to annual inflation. Is that right?
More or less, yeah.
And the inflation figure that's used does not include rent as an input to that, I don't think, right?
We use the Western States Consumer Price Index.
So do we have any data on the market rental rates, what they would be compared to what people are paying in the different mobile homes?
We do. We actually did a study in 2016. It was adopted in April of 2017 that looked at that. And it's a little complex because it's a unique ownership type that isn't reflected in the typical rental market. But yeah, I can share with you, and I can describe that in a little more detail now if you want, but it's going to be vague. And I can share with you the mobile home study before your decision if you feel like that's pertinent.
It seems like it is pertinent, in terms of this, but I would see if the other commissioners felt that way. And then in regards to the senior mobile home park, if something had that overlay, then that would mean that park could not be used for non-senior housing, I assume. That's how it works.
I haven't done any research on what those other 22 ordinances that were referenced, how they're structured. And so I can't advise you on that.
How long has the limit on the rent increases been in place? I assume it's been a long time and probably prior to the owners of those properties having those properties.
2 years. 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 2 We adopted that in 2017, I think, is when it became effective.
Okay.
And there's been one ownership change of the Lazy J since that time. All of the other parks have the same owners from prior to the rent stabilization.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Can you give me a little reminder of the ownership scenario with the Sandpiper? Did the city ever actually own the property? And does the city have any involvement with it now?
The city did own the property. The redevelopment agency actually owned the property. And the city sold it to resident-owned parks, who then borrowed money to do the development of the park. And then when the development of the park was complete, we also used our home ownership program to assist many of the, not all, but many of the mobile home owners to purchase those mobile homes. So we have indirect involvement in the sense that we have loans for those, for some of those individual units, and we have a loan for the land.
Okay. And can you give me a sense of any age restrictions that presently occur in the different parks, including the Sandpiper?
To my knowledge, the only age-restricted park is Lazy J. It's a senior mobile home park. By design, that's the market that they're targeting.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, just on that same line, the senior qualification at Lazy J is a qualification of the owners, or is there a city link to that? In other words, is that a strictly private rule?
Strictly private.
Okay, does the city of Arcata have any city age restrictions on any other property?
We do not have any regulatory restrictions on any property. We have some agreements with rural communities, formerly housing Humboldt, for Bayview project on Union, that's senior housing. We have agreements with Danco for the Plaza Point, which is senior housing. But there's no regulatory mechanisms for that. They're just done through our loan agreements.
So without that loan agreement assistance, would a zoning age restriction be legal? I'm asking that because we were told that a student housing restriction in the private market would not be legal.
Right. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to answer your question. I'll just tell you that right from the start. But for context, the state allows for senior housing, so that is a legal limitation that can be put on housing. To my knowledge, there's no other age restriction that you can place. So you can't say people have to be under 30. That would run afoul of the Fair Housing Act. And so these age-restricted, privately determined age-restricted facilities are, completely legal and legitimate. Whether we have the authority to place a regulation that enforces that age restriction, I don't know the answer to that. I'm taking it a little bit on faith right now that is possible, that there are these, in fact, 22 other jurisdictions that have adopted similar senior mobile home park restrictions, but I just have not had the opportunity to do the research on that. I can't tell you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, at this point, we're going to open up the hearing to public comment. Please be reminded that you should be addressing your comments to the commission, not to staff, and there won't be any back and forth during your comments. We'll just quietly listen. The other thing is that I have a timer here. It's a guideline, 5 minutes. If you need a little bit more time, you can have it, but we'd really like you as well as you can to be concise and to the point with your statements. Okay, thank you. Oh, and it helps us if you'll give us your name, you don't have to, and your relationship to this issue.
Okay, this is going to be nowhere near 5 minutes. I'm Linda Dirksen. I'm here to ask you to create a mobile home park exclusive zone for all of the mobile home parks in Arcata. A mobile home park exclusive zoning is the best protection that cities have against closure or conversion of their mobile home parks. Conversion means that the park owner shuts down the park, moves everyone out, and then converts the park to another use, like an upscale condo or an expensive single-family subdivision. California state law requires some minimal relocation benefits for park residents if their park closes or converts, but it's not much. Arcata does not yet have its own mobile home park closure conversion ordinance. We're working on it, but it will take some time to get that accomplished, maybe another year or more. But even the best closure conversion ordinances don't help park residents very much. So I guess this I would disagree with David about. The closure conversion ordinance is very minimal compared to the zoning. Zoning is powerful, the ordinance is. Okay, the Arcata City Council looked at various closure conversion ordinances and saw the severe limitations in these ordinances to help folks relocate. They were really shocked. So this is why Arcata needs a mobile home park exclusive zone. However, the draft ordinance you're considering tonight needs a few serious changes before you approve it. The most important change is this one. Please include the Arcata Trailer Court in the mobile home park exclusive zone. Closure or conversion of that park would likely create great difficulty for its 27 households. When I went to the 4 city council meetings earlier this year, in which a mobile home park exclusive zone was under consideration, I don't remember hearing any discussion about excluding the Arcata Trailer Court from the zone. So I wonder if the draft ordinance that you're looking at tonight is what the council had in mind. There are other changes that need to be made. We've detailed 9 changes in our written comments to you. Please consider them carefully. I want to, since I do have some time, I'm going to give you a quote. Attorney William Constantine from Santa Cruz, who is an expert in closure conversion ordinances in the state of California, lists zoning as the top priority for cities who want to protect their mobile home parks from closure or conversion. He said, "The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal has affirmed the right to use this form of zoning designation to permanently protect manufactured home parks from conversions to more profitable uses." So don't get it in your minds that a closure conversion ordinance is going to help the residents. It does very minimal stuff. It's not going to give them a new home. It might pay a little bit. It might give them a list of, here's some mobile homes in the area. It doesn't even say that there's spaces there. It's so minimal, it's shocking, even the best ordinances. So I just have to make that clear. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you. Good timing.
Hi, my name's Len Matthews. I live at the Lazy J. I can't see your name tag here, so I'd address you personally. I've lived in 4 stick-built homes. I moved here 2 years ago, September 21st, from Lake County. Beautiful stick-built house up on the lake overlooking the whole lake. It was gorgeous. 15 years in the county of Lake, 25 years in Guerneville. I had 3 stick-built houses. I moved to the Lazy J. The property that I own is sitting on a little slab, and I'm paying $575 for a little piece of concrete. The house I own is a single-wide mobile home. I never thought I'd end up in a mobile home park, but there I am. I'm beginning to really enjoy it. I didn't think that was going to happen either. It is. Becoming community involved, I was surprised at the picture that was given of the mobile home that's not included. The mobile home park, when I get up in the morning, I'm pretty consistent in my life. I get up, I make my bed, make my coffee, get out my Apple computer and go on to, because I'm part of Arcata CERT team with the police department. And I go on and look at the bulletin and see what happened in the 911 calls all around the area. Never once is there a 911 call to the Arcata Trailer Court, never. I've gone over and looked at the Arcata Trailer Court, gone on to meet the people over there. It's a nice place. The individuals that live there are paying up to $375 to live there. It's stable, they've lived there, it's a really nice place. Redevelopment, I was my city, Cecilia Aguiar-Curry, my assemblywoman, I was her personal assistant for the County of Lake. Very much involved politically over in Lake County. Redevelopment, until the funds were pulled, I can see where that would be a corridor wanted for redevelopment. Definitely. I would also see where you're taking away. You're taking that person's house away from them. You're removing that. In 5 years, are they going to find another place to live? No, they're not, David. They're going to be on the street. That's why I was laughing, because no, there's not going to be another house for that person. Some, yeah, but there's going to be people that are going to be over in Valley West. So I encourage you to include Arcata Trailer Court into this package. Thank you.
My name is Judy Mackey. I live at the Lazy J also. I was asked to pass this out from a neighbor of mine who is unable to come tonight. This is also about the Arcata Trailer Park. Can I pass this out to you folks?
To David.
There you go.
Let me know when I can talk.
You can go.
I've lived at the Lazy J mobile home park for about 3 years, and now in my life there's a big change, and it looks like I'm going to have to move up to Oregon. And I understand that the mobile home parks there as well are faced with the same issues. So my sense is that no matter how kindly you try to do it, you know, a conversion would mean that a lot of seniors would not even be able to live in California anymore. Because I've been looking, and as I look at the houses available, I cannot buy a house. I could possibly swing a single wide, but that would mean I would have to commit myself for the rest of my life. I want it to be my last move. That I'd have to commit myself to a mobile home park that I had no idea it was going to still be there for me when I was really old, when I was a senior. Right now I'm a sophomore senior. So that does scare me on behalf of so many seniors. And the other thing is that if these conversions are considered, I think it's great to have a financial consideration. But I think it's very important to have a social impact consideration. And that if you are asking people who are not dumb people, they may be old, but they're not dumb. So if you're asking them or you're saying to them, look, you're going to have to move, but we're going to help you, here's 15% or whatever. I really think that every person in the park that's in question should be given an opportunity to write down their situation and to say, look, there's no place in the country that I can look at. Maybe I can move to Tennessee. I don't know. I really don't know what to do. That's where they're going to be. So I just say that they need to have their input down on paper. Also, if that many people look at single people, someone who's 99 in their home, oh, you have to move.
they're going to require a lot of help. So let's just think in terms of the real factual life circumstances for these people, and let Arcata be the one that always looks for a win-win answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary Anderson again. You know, poverty is not a moral failing. It's a result of economic policies and practices. That's why I think I and others are concerned about the people in the trailer park, because you know, just take my situation. Everything I had after I sold my house went into buying my little mobile, which is an old mobile, but it's a very comfortable mobile and it can be kept up. And to think I'm 80 years old, I'm not going to, who would give me a loan? I may be dead in a couple of years, who knows? So you have to look at it from the situation of the person who's living in poverty. Like how are you going to deal with that? They don't have, of course they're living in their RVs. That's because that's all they can afford. That's all the money that they have. And that's the same is true of people living in the mobile home parks. It's a good choice for us because we have a community there and we support each other. But many of us are living in poverty. It's a pleasant poverty. I'm not complaining about it. I actually have had a good life here. But if I were to lose my mobile and have to go somewhere else, I don't know what I would do because I don't have the income to support that. So think about, this is Arcata. We care about people, right? We don't want those people who are in the trailer park living on the street. We don't want to make 27 more homeless people who have to sleep in doorways. I just want you to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, it's me again, Hillary Mosier, the area manager for the Golden State Manufactured Homeowners League. And there's a couple of things that I want to say. One is that I have had meetings with people in the Arcata trailer court. They don't live in RVs. They have mobile homes, and they spent money on them, and many of them have lived there for quite a long time. There's a few rentals that students get, that they move in and out as the school year, you know, as they graduate or whatever, that are important, just because we all know that students there's not enough housing for them either. So the importance of that area is something to be thought about all across the state, and that's what I do, is monitor the state. All across the state, there are cities that are closing down mobile home parks because park owners realize I can make so much more money by building a high-rise condo. And it's happened in Mountain View, it's happened in Pacifica, it's happened in Sunnyvale, and they just shut down people's lives, is what's happening. Here in Arcata, I realize that this is the, what do you call it, the entryway zone, or whatever it's called, and I get that, but it seems as if there should be accommodation for what exists right now and for super low income housing that is non-subsidized. These people pay their rent. Nobody from the city or the state or the feds pays them a nickel for this unsubsidized low income housing. The other thing I want to say, it's very interesting to me that the Planning Commission is not making the decision on closer conversion, at least to recommend to the City Council. All across the state, almost always it is the Planning Commission that makes that decision, including Humboldt County. So I feel like you guys are a body of people that are really thoughtful. You have experience now under your belt, consideration for that decision, because it goes hand in hand with the other. And I see you guys struggling because the senior overlay has not been explained or included, and we are disappointed that staff had it for over a week and didn't look at it and can't explain anything about it and hasn't researched it. I also want to say that for most of these homes, we own these homes. it's all we have. We don't rent them. We rent the land they're on, but it's our single greatest asset. And to take that from us, like even in Humboldt County, we were there for the planning commission meeting for the closure, and they went from a $10,000 payment, we're closing, here's 10 grand, get out of here, to, I think it was 30,000. Because we were there saying, how's that going to help? My house would sell right now for $85,000. And they were all amazed. What? That's how much they sell for? But it's true. That's our asset. That's what we leave to our children. And to say, here's 10 grand, get the hell out of here. Where are we going to move? They say, well, you get to move to another mobile home park. In Humboldt County, there are no new mobile home parks being built. And there are no real available spaces either. So it's, the closure conversion is really kind of a fantasy. It doesn't really help that much. It helps some, I guess, but you should be deciding it along with the zoning overlay, I think. And that's coming from a statewide view, not from just a local little view. And it's a suggestion I have, and I'm not sure, I might need to make that to the city council. I want to thank you guys for putting in the time and for doing this job. And I apologize for the outburst. I want to thank you for all of your efforts. I know this job is not easy. I know you have to read tons of boring stuff. I couldn't do it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Pam Myers, and I just have a question. I'm not sure that it can be answered tonight, but just to consider. I'm new here. I've lived for about 1.5 years in Lazy J, and I love this area. I finally have come home. What I'm not always clear about is what has gone on before, and I'm listening about the trailer park, the Arcata trailer park, and I think it was referred to that there is a Arcata corridor, and that maybe this is not suitable for, am I saying it correctly? But if there's a movement to upgrade a certain area, I just want to know why the trailer park would not be considered in its present form part of that. If I have to research it myself, I will. But thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bernarda Craig. I live at the Arcata Lazy J. The city council requested that the mobile home park exclusive zone ordinance be for all the mobile home parks in Arcata. And Arcata has not yet met the 2014 goal for affordable, and by affordable, I'm talking about those 3 levels of low income people like me. I'm just above the very bottom limit, which would be, I believe, $11,000 a year. Anyway, Arcata has not met the 2014 goal of affordable housing units, and now you're talking about excluding the 7th and K Street Mobile Home Park, which is 27 units, that 2 of which have hookups for RVs. And that is the only park, mobile home park in Arcata, that does have hookups for RVs. Mr. Loya spoke about changing the use of that mobile home park to another higher density structure, which would only provide 15% of low income, affordable housing. He didn't qualify it as low income. 15% of the 27 units you are losing is 4 units. That doesn't help the people there or the people in the future. Please remember that this is the graying of America. More and more people are going to need affordable housing as we go forward. So I'm asking you, could you please help me to understand the rationale for this exclusion with regard to the perpetual deficiency of low-income affordable housing in Arcata? Why would you exclude the 27 units? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Steve Myers. My wife just spoke. We live in Lazy J. We've been there about a year and a half. We bought an old 1973 double wide for $19,000, and we've spent the last year and a half fixing it up, putting a new roof on it, and just new flooring, new walls. And I think it's worth $55,000 or so now. But I'm given to understand that it's illegal for a 1973 trailer to be hauled down the road in California. So it would have to be destroyed. And I just want you to consider if you do have to do that, to give the people its worth. In other words, I paid $19,000 for it. I don't want $19,000 for it. I want $55,000 so I can try to find another place to live. I can't move the trailer because it's illegal to tow it down the road. So anyhow, I don't expect that's going to happen at Lazy J, but it'll help you see the problem that these people in that other trailer park are going to be up against. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to this issue?
I have a question on it. What do you consider a living?
You know, this is a televised thing.
So what do you consider a fair
Joe, are you going to help
fee
with the
for us
mic?
to pay for these places?
We would love to hear from you, and so would our TV audience, so we're going to bring you the mic.
I was just wondering what you consider affordable for people on a limited income.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Linda Madoff. I live at the Lazy J. Since the evening was expanded to include the senior overlay zone, I just wanted to also ask that you really consider that seriously. In your packet, which the study that Linda and Jan Dirksen made, which I get the impression that some of you have actually read. There's so much good information in there, and I urge you to read it. But the thing that bears repeating is how important it is to protect a senior park, because without the senior overlay zone designation, it is much easier for the owners to convert it to an all-family. And with the all-family, you will have much greater turnover. The rents will be increasingly higher, even with the rent stabilization ordinance, which limits the increase vacancy control to 10%. That can be a significant amount that goes up and up and up, and so reduces the affordable housing very, very quickly. So I urge you to consider it a priority to put in a senior overlay zone, even if you say it only protects one park. That is 220 units, which I'm not sure how many people actually live, but obviously it's at least, I would say, 300 people then who live within the Lazy J. It's a significant amount of people, where the median age, I'm told, is over 80. So for those people to be displaced in their elder years is a very, very painful and difficult thing. And as you know, it is very difficult to find any housing, and there is a good community there. So in all of these cases, especially at the Lazy J, where we are now owned by a multi-billion-dollar international organization, obviously they have the power, and the most any ordinance can provide is a layer of protection. But we really ask you to help us and give us whatever protection you can, and we appreciate it greatly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stephen Oki, and I live at the Arcata Mobile Home Park, and I'm a student at HSU. And I have to say that I have done a paper on affordability of mobile home parks and the protection that was given to them in Portland. And I definitely think that this is a great way to go. I think it protects so many residents, and one of the last real affordable housing options that is readily available is currently available. I do agree with Judith that I think there should be some language in there regarding what exactly are we stating by mobile home, whether it's a manufactured home, tiny home, and RV, because I think the tiny homes and RVs do allow for another level of affordability. So I think moving forward, I definitely think this is a worthwhile amendment, and that it is a great zoning change, but I do think that there is some language that could be included to make it even stronger. In the mobile home park that I'm in, there are 2 RVs that are currently in there, and I would be worried that they might lose their protection just because of language. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Okay, seeing none, we will close the public input portion of the meeting and move on to commission deliberations. And/or a motion? Please.
Okay. After listening to all of you who've come here today, all of the members of the public who've explained why having a senior component to any mobile home park protection ordinance is so important, I'm convinced. And what I would like to do would be to see if we would like to continue this item so that staff has time to incorporate those provisions into a broader ordinance that would include at least the Lazy J mobile home park specifically as an area protected for senior residents in our zoning, in our land use code within mobile park overlay zone for seniors. I'm not sure exactly how that would look legally, but I think staff could probably figure that out with our city attorney. I'm also very concerned about adopting major land use code amendments at this point prior to our consideration of broader housing policy issues, the imminent update of our general plan housing element, which is going to be addressing affordable housing for all groups in Arcata, and public consideration of the gateway plan as well, which is being used by staff as the rationale for not including the Arcata Trailer Park in the proposed protections. So I think actually that as long as our mobile home park conversion moratorium remains in place, we need to do some more work on whatever ordinance we would recommend that the City Council adopt. And I would hope that the Commission today might be able to discuss the types of things that would make sense in a revised proposed ordinance.
I agree with everything that Judith said. I also want to add a few things is I wish we could get more specific as to what a mobile home is, like anything that is mobile or used to be, oh, you're already on it?
I'm sorry, but is it?
We need to be more specific.
You've done your own research on that, Judy. Can you retain that, and I'll bring it back in a follow-up update?
What I actually showed her was,
or if you can read it into the record,
okay,
perhaps.
For the record, what I just showed her was the printout of the first 4 pages in the definition section of ordinance number 1514 of 2017, which was the rent stabilization for mobile parks ordinance that was adopted. And it does include definitions for Arcata's mobile homes and mobile home parks. And I'm assuming that those are the same definitions that we would be proposing to use in an ordinance that we're reviewing now, but there's nothing that explicitly says that it's the same definitions. My point was that I was considering these definitions to be narrow. They do include RVs. And just for those of you who haven't recently read this ordinance, mobile home park is defined in the mobile home residency law, which is defined as any area of land within the city of Arcata where 2 or more mobile home spaces are rented or held out for rent to accommodate mobile homes used for human habitation. And the mobile home definition does include RVs. It doesn't include other types of manufactured housing explicitly, or what we would call tiny homes, but it doesn't preclude them either. It's just kind of ambiguous.
Yeah, I would like to nail that down and be fairly liberal with what that is. And then the other thing I was going to say is I did some research on the conversion, closing and conversion of mobile home parks, and the other jurisdictions did go before the Planning Commission. So at first I thought, oh, it's missing from our package, but then I realized we were never going to see it. So if the council doesn't want us to see it, that's fine. But the other jurisdictions I looked at, it did go through the Planning Commission first.
Do you mind if I just address a couple of the comments that came up?
Right in.
In terms of the senior component to this exclusive zoning, I didn't receive the comments requesting that in time to address those in this. And I guess what I would recommend is that the Planning Commission consider moving this forward to the City Council, in particular because it sounds like there may be some policy questions that the City Council could help resolve, and that the Planning Commission, as you are well aware, the Planning Commission or the City Council can initiate zone amendment. So the City Council can take that on, or the Planning Commission can make a recommendation to the City Council that they take on the senior issue separately. In terms of the vehicle, the units that are inside of these mobile home parks, this ordinance is a geographic, not a unit-based decision, and so whatever the units are that are held out for rent within those mobile home parks are not affected negatively or positively by this. Directly. They're affected positively indirectly in that this ordinance will preserve those lands for mobile home park. So long as the mobile home park itself allows those units to remain there, or so long as they're legally habitable, they'll be protected incidentally by this protection. And so I think maybe there was a little bit of confusion there. The definitions of mobile home park and mobile homes and all of those other items that are held within the municipal code for both the purposes of rent stabilization and closure and conversion, those definitions are unique to those ordinances. And even though we're using the same term, because those mobile homes that are protected by those provisions are contained within the mobile home parks that would be protected by these provisions, this term, mobile home park, is agnostic as to those definitions, because there are physical boundaries that we're outlining. We're saying, whatever you want to call this, you can call it anything you want, but these regulations apply to these spaces. So all of the units that are contained within those spaces have that incidental protection. So I just want to make sure that's real clear.
David, can you just remind us, is the number of units exactly fixed in each of the parks?
They are, and they're not fixed by us. They're fixed by HCD, Housing Community Development Department. They have permits for the numbers and types of units that can be leased within the park. They're limited by the number of RVs that there can be, or the number of stick-built units that there can be, and the number of mobile homes, and their sizes too, the spaces. And they can apply for new permits with HCD and reconfigure the park, but they're absolutely 100% specified as to how many units there are in each park.
And while we're asking questions, can you clarify if this senior overlay went through for all the parks? Right now, there's no age specifics on, 4 of the 5? How would that play out in the long run?
Well, I think that the idea is to have the senior overlay on Lazy J only, because Lazy J is a market rate senior. It's currently market rate senior, and so I think some of the comments that were made tonight, I mean, they're very compelling, and I think that we really need to address those in a policy discussion. I'm not prepared today to address those at a policy level. But the council and staff have given quite a bit of consideration to this mobile home park exclusive overlay zoning. And to address the idea of whether or not we need to merge these with all these other planning issues that we're doing, at some point we're going to lose the ability to adopt an urgency ordinance if we're not in fact doing something to resolve the conditions that created the urgency. And so I would recommend that, based on the council's direction that they gave to staff, that we bring as quickly as possible a mobile home exclusive overlay zoning ordinance to them for consideration. That the council, I'm not trying to say, make your decision tonight. If you want to take a second look, if you want me to bring the closure and conversion ordinance for your review, just so you can understand it better, even though you're not at this point making, a recommendation on that. All of those things seem reasonable to occur within the timeframes of rapid response to this urgent issue. But I would recommend that you not wait until we've completed all of our analysis on the general plan updates, the housing element, and the specific area plan.
Why is it urgent if there's a 24-month moratorium?
The moratorium was based on the urgency, the concern that was raised in the community about the potential for closure and conversion. Now that we let the cat out of the bag that, hey, we're going to adopt this ordinance that you can't convert your mobile home park from mobile home use, there was a fear that some mobile home park owners might want to take it upon themselves to convert before the ordinance was in place. So there was a sense of urgency around, and these were literally the findings that we made to
Is this
adopt
ordinance
the urgency.
1515 you're talking about?
I believe that's the ordinance number,
Okay,
yeah.
so that one is urgent.
And then followed up by
I understand.
1517. And we were required, in 1515, we were required to declare the state of the urgency, the reasons for the urgency, and this is the reason why. And then in 1517, which continued that to 24 months, we had to state the measures that we had taken, the steps that we're taking in order to resolve the urgent items.
But ordinance 1515, you said we weren't going to see it at all. That's going to the city council. That's what, because I asked for it. I don't think it's been passed. It's not on the website. 1515, the urgency ordinance to conversion that has been passed? Because I haven't seen it. I looked on the website for it.
Okay, let me back up. And I believe the ordinance numbers for the urgency measure that we adopted, which put a moratorium on closure and conversion, were 1515 and 1517. 1515 was a very near-term, short period, 45-day ordinance where nothing could happen within 45 days.
Okay.
We extended that ordinance for a total of 24 months from the adoption of 1515 so that nothing could happen while we took the time necessary to create the regulatory framework that will resolve the urgency need. This is that ordinance. This ordinance that we're trying to adopt here will eliminate the urgent need because this, compared with the closure and conversion ordinance, will establish the regulatory framework that prevents or attempts to preserves mobile home parks to the greatest extent allowable by law. The commenters who spoke tonight and said that this zoning ordinance is very strong, that is true. The zoning ordinance, there's a lot of discretion associated with converting, changing the zone in the future. But it's not 100%. It's not, and it doesn't include all of the measures necessary to protect and preserve the people who are living in these mobile home parks. And so that's where the companion closure and conversion ordinance comes from. So there's 4 ordinances that we're talking about for closure and conversion.
And so we need to source out whether or not we should just either pass this one tonight, continue this one, and or try to continue it to combine it with the closure and conversion.
It's not going to be combined with, like they're not going to be merged. The closure and conversion and this ordinance will not be merged. They're located in 2 different sections of the municipal code. That's the current direction we have. Now, if the council changes their mind, decides that all of those closure and conversion measures need to be embedded in the land use code, then that would be before you by law. If the council decides that they want you to review the closure and conversion and provide your recommendation on it anyway, they can certainly do that, and you can certainly ask them to do that in your resolution that you forward to the council. But at the end of the day, these have 2 different functions. Part of the reason for keeping the functions separate is that there are due process established associated with land use decisions that are separate from the discretionary decisions associated with the closure and conversion ordinance. And so keeping those separate and having 2 different tools to use I will, strenuously defend that position. I don't think that merging those 2 ordinances is wise at all.
Can you remind me where we're at on the 24-month moratorium?
We're at about month 3.5 now, I believe. I'd have to double check the dates. I believe it's in your resolution. May 1st was when we adopted, so it's 24 months from May 1st. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm looking at the ordinance numbers now too. I want to correct the record. 1517 was the urgency ordinance. 1519 was the urgency ordinance extension. 1515, which you referenced earlier, Commissioner Visade-Alcock, is the closure and conversion ordinance. I believe that's the case.
Okay, commission comments, Mike?
Just a follow-up question. In terms of the rights of the owners, of the homeowners in those mobile home parks, do they have right to stay there? In other words, as long as the mobile home park is open and they're paying their rent in a timely manner, do they have a right to stay there, or is that something that's discretion of the owner? Because that feeds into some of this conversation.
There are some provisions that are different for mobile home parks than there are for standard rentals, but there's basically, it's a tenancy relationship, and so you have to have cause for eviction, typically.
Thank you.
So there are a lot of questions here that we can't answer, that we don't have the we're not in a position to solve all these problems. The only thing really we have before us now is this mobile home park combining zone ordinance. And it is something that is definitely called for. It's a benefit to the people who have the mobile homes, and it needs to be done. The closure and conversion ordinance is out of our hands, and in fact, the mobile home park combining zone ordinance, really, we're only providing a recommendation. It's up to the city council. The key issue is one that we really don't have any great say in. The key issue is what happens to the people in the mobile home parks. And you know, I have great sympathy and for the position of older people who are living in their home. They don't want to have to move. For some people, moving could be fatal. You know, it's a tough issue, and we're not in a position really to answer that. I think maybe the best we can do is pass along our recommendation on the combining zone and hope for the best on the closure and conversion ordinance. I personally think that the closure and conversion ordinance should provide for not just a token bit of help for people who are ousted from their homes, but real help in finding a new place. And even with that, it's really a sad thing to contemplate. So the other issue of the senior mobile home park ordinance would, is another whole question. But what we can do right now is pass along our recommendation on the combining zone, get that done so the city council can take up the issue and go with it.
Please.
Okay, so what's before us today is the mobile home park proposed combining zone, which is a land use code amendment, essentially. And it does include some proposals for what the owners would need to provide if they ask the city to rezone those mobile home park areas. Doesn't say a whole lot about what the city would need to do. It doesn't even, the draft doesn't even indicate what type of affordable housing that 15% would be, whether it would be for low income or extremely low income residents. It just says 15% of the converted spaces. I'm not sure that the commission right now is in a position to even debate what the appropriate percentage is, or whether the city should be required to indicate in there that the account would be to build affordable housing for low-income or extremely low-income residents. So I think that's something that we would need to further discuss, or the city council would. So I think that suggestion of passing some of these tough issues onto the city council, including whether or not to include the 7th and K Street
Arcata Trailer Court.
Arcata Trailer Court in the combining zone is important. That's some fairly heavy politics that they ultimately are going to make a decision on anyway. But I think it seems really important to me that whatever combining zone is adopted include a senior provision for the Lazy J existing mobile home park, which is already senior qualified. And I'd really like to continue this and ask staff to include that language in an amended version of this proposed ordinance.
Let me just ask Commission if there would be more comfort with this proposal if Arcata Trailer Court is not included, but that the language in here was more favorable to what relocation looked like, the stuff that John was bringing up earlier. If it was real, if it was solid, if it was something that we all felt like, okay, if whatever happens there has a real future that is acceptable to the tenants in any kind of development scenario that might want to occur that we don't know anything about. We don't know if there's even a proposal. Would that change your feelings about the rest of the ordinance being okay?
Did the council specifically ask that the Arcata Trailer Park Court not be included? Was that their direction to us?
When we had the discussion at the city council, the initial proposal was to have a mobile home base zoning. So right now we have, residential high and residential medium as base zones for all of our mobile home parks. And so the initial idea was to just change those base zonings to mobile home, so that there's not a residential high or residential medium on any of those parks. It's just mobile home, and that's the type of zoning that it is. And in order to do that, I mean, theoretically, you could use an exclusion from that as well. You could decide, well, we're going to zone this one and not that one for this reason or that reason or the other. But the discussion that I had with the council at that time was that, it's not clear to me at this point that all of the mobile home parks currently in existence are parks that we would want to protect with this overlay, and that there may be parks that are existing now that we would want to consider actually encouraging the change of the use. I didn't at that time have discussion with them about which parks I was talking about, but they all conceded that yes, that seems like a good plan to us, and so let's do this overlay zone instead. And so that's where I feel like the the conversation started. This is the recommendation of staff, and again, on that point, the Planning Commission can certainly make a recommendation that don't take staff's recommendation, include all of the parks. But they did take it up not directly but indirectly, and understood that there would be a weighing on each park whether or not it should be included or not included, and that's the reason why we have the combining zone instead of a base zone.
I would love to see this come back all cleaned up, and I'd love to see it including the Arcata, again, I can't remember that trailer park, whatever it's called. And I'd love to see a senior zone over Lazy J, and then I'd love to see what the conversion enclosure looks like. I wish we could just see the whole thing.
So to be clear, I think that the policy development associated with the senior park is going to take some time, and the other elements that aren't under your purview are certainly, we can bring those into the record. There's no question about that. What I would recommend is that you make some decision on this ordinance. Not necessarily tonight. If you want to continue to the next meeting and take action on it next meeting, so you can, gather your thoughts about that, or do more research, or if you want staff to bring something back for your review. But to segregate those issues and then recommend to the City Council that they initiate a code change or at least to evaluate initiating a code change to adopt another combining zone for Lazy J that would include that senior element. Mainly because I think that if we start to sidetrack this process to start to explore an area that, heretofore we don't have any experience with, it's going to take another several months. And, again, we're going to, the council was expecting and anticipating this come back. You could certainly even make a recommendation that, hey, look, we think this is good, but you really ought to, in addition to this, add into this ordinance, and to take that time now and do that. But I would hate to have the Planning Commission spend a lot of time at this level and not get a policy check in with the City Council as to, what their expectation is. This is, unlike many of the zone amendments that you might undertake, where the Planning Commission, where a lot of it is really within the purview of the Planning Commission. This is a zoning tool that is largely around a social engineering element, that there's a political pressure behind creating this zone to do some social zoning, if you will, as opposed to strict land use zoning. And so I think that the Planning Commission would probably benefit from a check-in with the council, taking your initial recommendations, whether they're tonight or at some meeting in the very near future, based on the analysis of whatever it is that you take in between now and then.
Well, so there's no danger right now that any of the mobile home parks are going to get closed, right? Because there's a 24, you still have another.
Currently, there's a moratorium,
months,
that's correct.
So we're okay. So I do feel like this is kind of a mess, and it does need to come back to us. It's just, there's so many mistakes and the things we added, and I couldn't vote on this right now. I'd like to see a cleaned up version.
Okay, Mike has something to say?
Yeah, in regards to the court, the mobile court, would we have to say whether we think that should be included or not, or could we say in our decision that the City Council look at that in terms of whether that would be included in this combining zone?
Well, it would ultimately be up to them, but would we want to pass the buck, not weigh in?
I don't know. That's what I'm asking. Yeah. Right.
I think we've got that gateway-specific plan well in the works right now, and deciding whether or not that list of mobile home parks to be subject to the combining zone includes the Arcata Trailer Court or not might depend on the extent to which that gateway plan provides adequate affordable housing for low-income and extremely low-income people. And in fact, it could even specify that priority would go to people who might be displaced from that park, and it could also specify levels of support. This has been done in other cities, and to exclude that property from an ordinance that we're proposing now without having any idea whatsoever what types of housing affordable to those displaced people might be, doesn't seem like a great idea. But since we have another 21 months on the existing moratorium, it does seem like there's plenty of time for staff to develop proposals to put before us that would please the City Council, that would please current residents of Lazy J, that would avoid passing the buck back to the City Council so that we can do our job here. And so I'd like to propose doing that, and also putting some alternate proposals before us for what owners and the City of Arcata would be required to do under D1 and D2 if rezoning is proposed.
Is that a motion?
So I move to continue this item to an unspecified date when staff can return a proposal to us for our consideration.
I'm going to suggest that you continue it to a date certain.
Could you suggest one?
Yeah, your very next meeting. The City Council wants to see this come before them.
I won't be here next meeting.
Would you be ready to?
We need a quorum, I believe.
Would you be ready to include the revisions that we've discussed here by the next whenever?
I will certainly be ready to, make these changes that were proposed tonight. Any additional changes that you make a recommendation for, if you wanted to include the Lazy J as part of your recommendation, that map would be amended. And, I wouldn't view that as necessarily passing the buck, but if the majority of you felt that that was the appropriate recommendation to make to the City Council, then you should just make it. And then in terms of, the senior component, I'm going to recommend that you take that up separately, because I will not be ready by next meeting to address that in any great detail.
Okay, I'm not going to make that move without considering the Lazy J. That's why I specified a date when you will be able to address that. And I don't think it makes sense to send a recommendation on to the City Council without it.
Well, you could always, in your staff report to the City Council, say that Planning Commission was talking about the senior.
Yeah, I think that the recommendation to the City Council at this point is to evaluate that next. In addition, the Planning Commission has the authority under the Land Use Code to initiate a code amendment, just as the City Council does. So if you make a recommendation on this and this starts moving forward, right after that you can say, I'd like to initiate a code amendment to include a similar thing for senior housing overlay, and we'll check in with the City Council on that recommendation and initiate a code amendment upon that direction. So it doesn't have to be bound at the hip, I guess, and you could accomplish both things. But to address the reasons why we adopted an urgency ordinance now, you can continue to move this forward, which is why I would recommend that you would continue to a date certain.
Given that we're in the midst of a housing element update and the gateway specific plan, it does seem odd that we're being asked to start these amendments piecemeal, and especially with regard to the questions of what should be included and what shouldn't be included. it does seem as though that moratorium gives us some time to understand how this fits into the broader picture, and to make sure that that broader picture includes consideration of these issues, including relocation assistance requirements that the city will assume and that they would impose on landowners. So I'm not comfortable going ahead on this particular proposal.
If there's any way in your ultimate motion, whatever it winds up being, that you can provide some direction as to how you believe staff, what specifically you want staff to bring to address those issues, I think that would be helpful too.
Why don't you make a shot at clarifying that, Judith, since
Okay. I think it would make sense for staff to come back with a proposed ordinance that would address the issue of a senior combining zone overlay for the Lazy J, that would allow us to consider options for a recommendation on relocation assistance for rezoning and city's obligations if rezoning is to be considered later. That would be conversion of a mobile home park. And to give us some idea of the uses being proposed for the area of the Arcata Trailer Court under the Gateway specific plan, with appropriate assistance for current residents there.
The senior overlay. Did you say that? Anybody else have anything to contribute? If we're going to continue this,
I'm sorry, was there an amendment to the motion? Or is this a motion, or are we just trying to?
I didn't hear that as a motion, but
That you asked to clarify the things that you would like us that you would like us to recommend that you bring back to us, and so the motion is simply to continue this item to a time when staff is able to provide us with that recommendation.
yeah, unless there's discussion.
Do you need a second on that? I'll second that motion.
Okay, and this is not to a date certain, this is to a date at which the staff can provide the amount of that information. Okay? We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Okay. Motion carries. Thank you all for coming tonight and contributing to this difficult topic. I'm sure we'll be revisiting many times over the next 24 months, or at least a couple. And consider this just a primer for us. This is the first, this is the opening salvo for us on this topic, and it's a big one. We get it. So thank you. Okay, meeting will continue now. If you can exit quietly, unless you're staying. Sure. There's a request for a very brief restroom break.
Can I just make a quick announcement before anybody leaves? Would that be all right?
Yes, please.
As everyone here is keenly interested in housing, I wanted to make sure to take this opportunity. I was going to mention it later as well, but the city is hosting a housing workshop on September 23rd at the Community Center on Martin Luther King Jr. Way. Starting at 6, we'll have a charrette style. It'll be mostly a listening session, but a charrette style engagement, and there'll be food and a play area. So if you like to play or eat or give us your ideas, please come to it.
David, do you also want to pitch that they take the housing survey online?
Yeah, no, actually, that's a great idea. If you could also take the time to visit our website on the main page, down towards the bottom in our news feed, there's a link to housing survey. And what we're trying to do with that is to collect your thoughts and ideas about your housing needs and your housing desires, just so that we can have more detailed information than just census data that's really, not tied to actual individuals. We don't use your actual name, that's all anonymous, but the information tied to real individuals' experiences would be helpful for the work that we're doing. So, yeah, please take that.
Thank you, David, and we'll have a very brief break here. Okay, welcome back to our Planning Commission hearing for September 10th, 2019. We are moving on now to business items, of which we have one, which is the Housing Element Policy Review.
Okay, so I timed my presentation on this beforehand just so that I can give you an idea in advance, and I've only got 2 hours of presentation, so we should be done by 10. This This agenda item is primarily just sort of an early introduction. It's kind of the ideas that we wanted to kind of popcorn ideas, if you will, for policy considerations for the housing element. We are, as I mentioned at the end of the last item, having a housing outreach workshop. And it's mostly going to be a listening session, but we want to provide enough information about where we're going with the housing element at this point, or looking backwards at how we achieved, how well we achieved the goals of the last housing element, to be able to, have that discussion with the community. And so this is a little bit free form. I can give you a little bit of structure here, but it's a little free form. What we wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to do was to give us some early input or ask us questions, about how is this policy working and that sort of thing. I also asked several staff members today. I kind of shopped it around City Hall to see, what's your favorite housing element policy, or what's the best thing you think we can do to, promote housing in Arcata. And so I've come prepared with a list of conversation starters if the party gets dull. This is not a publicly noticed hearing per se, so it was noticed on the agenda, and we sent out the information to people who are tracking these issues. Obviously, not a lot of response tonight, but we do want to make sure we're doing our best this housing element cycle, and in addition with the strategic infill plan, the rest of it as the umbrella planning documents, to create lots and lots and lots of opportunity for public engagement. That's primarily what this is about. So let me just orient you real quick. You had the housing element in your packet. I'm sure you all are very familiar with this, with the work that you've been doing lately. Some of the areas where I think we could potentially start, starting on packet page 25 with the goals. And then the housing element policies that follow those goals. Are there areas that we want to either start thinking about that are goals that aren't included, or are there policy direction that we need to start thinking about that's not included? That's a pretty big chunk. If there's anything starting on page 29 in the actual implementation measures that caught your eye, I'm happy to address any questions that you might have about those. And then we have a bunch of, what I would call at this point crazy ideas that we've been trying to develop around housing over the past several years. Everything from trying to identify zones, that should be upzoned, kind of the vanilla flavor policy or measures that we can take, to trying things like finding areas where it would be acceptable to have 3 units on a parcel in a residential low density neighborhood instead of just the 2 that are currently allowed by state law. So you're guaranteed, if you want one, you can have a primary and an accessory dwelling unit. So this policy would actually allow people to have a tertiary unit, a 3rd unit on their property. And that's, I don't know, that's some crazy Ben and Jerry's flavor right there. And then we've got a whole lot in between. So I kind of want to turn it over and see, are there questions, or do you have policy recommendations? Does somebody want to jump in with a conversation starter?
I have a conversation starter or a question. Do you have any sense as to whether or not our occupancy rates have changed since this 2000? We were down to 34%. I have a sense that there's more owner-occupied occurring these days than there has been. And I just wonder if you have any ideas on that.
So super high-level overview on owner occupancy rates. Owner occupancy is calculated by the census as the total number of units that are owned by the person who lives in them within the jurisdiction divided by the total number of units. So the city has 2 things. One, it has a fairly large number of multifamily units that are not ownership opportunities. But relative to other jurisdictions with similar levels of multifamily, we're still very low by comparison. The national average is approaching 60% owner occupancy. The state average is close to 50%, and the city of Arcata is 34%. We've hovered around the low 30s.
Could I ask if you're comparing Arcata's owner occupancy rates to those of other small college towns? How do we compare?
I have looked at that. We're really, really low compared to other small college towns. And I can bring you the specific data on that. I certainly will as we get into more detail. I don't have them available at this time.
And in terms of number of condominiums, there's very few, right? Condominium buildings in Arcata.
There are very few currently.
But you're saying that that's part of having a multifamily owner occupied. That would be the solution, right? I mean,
that would be.
What else is there? Yeah.
And so to finish the answer to your question, recent area community survey data that are generated on a subsample of the census, the census data on periodic cycles showed that the owner occupancy was approaching 35%, upper 35% at the last time I saw the data. But it was probably still within the margin of error to include, what's included in the housing element now. So I can't tell you whether we're actually on the rise or not.
Okay, thank you. And another one would be, is some kind of an infill master plan likely to be an important part of this new housing element?
Absolutely. Right now, the City of Arcata's regional housing needs allocation share is approximately 650 units. We haven't completed our analysis of the vacant sites at this point, but my expectation is that we're going to fall very short. The state has changed the site requirements for what will be considered, especially for lower income housing units. And so they've really ratcheted down on jurisdictions who would just say, oh yeah, we've got this vacant, third acre parcel over here, and maybe we can get 30 units on it, or whatever, whatever the shenanigans were that jurisdictions were up to. So long story short, yes, we're going to fall short of our RENA in what we have available. And the infill plan will be a recommendation for an implementation measure. My concern is that it's still, even that as an implementation measure is not going to satisfy the government code requirements now for housing elements to be certified.
And will the infill master plan be like a bulleted or chaptered section of this element? And there isn't one now, right? I mean, this is a whole new phase in our discussion.
Whole new ball of wax, yeah, and it's not going to be included inside the housing element. Instead, it'll be one of these, like under table 4 implementation measures, starting on page 29. Probably bullet number 1 will be develop an infill, develop the Arcata Gateway specific area plan.
You mentioned the gateway specific. That's one part of infill. There's other infills that aren't going to be part of the gateway at all, right?
That's true, yeah. And a lot of those areas where we might have up zones, we will include those specifically. I'd like to try and include as many of those that we can include specifically in this housing element as targeted rezones. And so bullet number 2 will probably be targeted rezones, and we'll look at certain areas and develop a map that says, let's rezone this, and the other as a method to accomplish our RENA, Regional Housing Needs Allocation.
Great, thanks. Other questions, comments from Commission?
I'm wondering, in the format that the state tends to like to see on these housing elements, there's not a whole lot of flexibility in terms of really going in depth to address special populations. Here in particular, we have students, and they represent a very large portion of Arcata's population, and especially the low and extremely low income housing needs. And so I'm wondering how this housing element update is going to address students, seniors, and other populations with special housing needs?
I guess the short answer is I don't know yet, because we need to go through that process, the public process to trying to develop that policy. But I do think it's an important policy area. We have policy in the current housing element that will probably carry forward, and certainly we can look at refining that. And we do have implementation measures, some of which have been, moderately successful. Others, that we haven't done a whole lot on, frankly. I think the issue that you raised just a moment ago, let me make sure I understand it correctly, because this is an issue that comes up quite often, is that students, even though many of them are on their own financially, or largely on their own financially, still have limited resources, and yet they don't qualify as low-income individuals for the purposes of the majority of our programs, because they may still, even though they're in reality on their own financially, they're still claimed on their parents' taxes. Was that a nuance that you were trying to get at?
No. I'm actually talking about students who are low and extremely low income people, who have very specific needs, who don't necessarily fit the income-only orientation of the RENA, for example.
Well, I guess the simple answer to that is that if they are low-income people and actually qualify under our definitions, then they would also qualify for any of the programs that we were trying to develop for people who are low income, irrespective of their student status. But the majority of students the issue that I've heard is that there are many students who are financially independent, but they're still claimed on their parents' taxes, and so they won't qualify for any of our programs.
Okay, I guess I'm thinking in terms specifically of a lot of these students don't stick around for very long. So for any program that the city is putting forward that requires, an application period or a qualification period and residency here for a year or two or more, that kind of bumps students out realistically. And I'm just wondering how the city is going to consider addressing seniors and students of special populations whose needs aren't simply defined by income.
Again, I think that we need to flesh out whether or not the existing implementation measures on the book are enough, or whether we need to address them in more detail. But if regardless of whether they're students, if they're income qualified, there's no residency requirement. You can come and join our city in one day, and join our housing population and benefit from the affordable housing projects that we've developed in the city of Arcata. So I just want to make sure that it's clear there's no residency restriction.
I know, but in terms of even understanding that these programs exist, most people have to have been around here long enough to have connected with those opportunities.
Okay.
And so effectively they cut out students who are only here for 4 years. Anyway, I guess I'm just wondering, in terms of the format of the housing element, what opportunities there are going to be to really flesh out some programs that are specifically directed toward our growing senior population and a student population that right now is feeling a little bit under pressure because of a lack of affordable housing here.
Yeah, I don't have the answers at this point, but I can tell you that we're making a Herculean effort to include perspectives of underrepresented populations and vulnerable populations right now in our outreach. So it'll be, I think, interesting to see what ideas come out of that. So it's definitely on our minds for the housing element update.
Thank you. Do we work with the HSU Housing Office to determine what the students' needs are?
We do very regularly. In fact, right now, part of our outreach is pop-up meetings, is what I call them. Largely right now, what we've been focusing on is ensuring that people know about this housing workshop on the, coming up next Monday, and also, to have people take the survey, the housing survey. But also, it's an opportunity to have a conversation with those individuals about what their housing needs are. We're doing those on campus. We're doing them at the Friday night markets in Eureka. We're doing them at the farmers market here in Arcata. And we're trying to establish, we'll be at Arcata Elementary's back to school night on Thursday. So we're trying to get into the community and do outreach and have just these pop-up tables that will really engage, people where they're at, as opposed to asking them to come to a planning commission meeting and tell us what they think. So I don't know if I answered your question. I felt like I rambled a little bit. I apologize.
Well, I was kind of thinking in terms of finding out from the HSU Housing Office, whatever they call it, what the needs are, because they probably have their finger on the pulse of what kind of problems the students are having finding housing.
We do, absolutely. In fact, through Equity Arcata, which was kind of a spinoff of some of the equity work that we did a couple of years ago with a number of different organizations throughout the community, we have a housing equity working group that has been working on developing programs specifically targeting racial equity, but a lot of that effort is directed at students. One of the programs that's been developed through that is being developed through that is a security deposit, basically loan or grant program to assist students with security deposits when they need to move into different units. And so, yeah, we're regularly working with them, through our liaisons meeting monthly, through those Equity Arcata meetings, and I'm in contact with the director of housing there on, multiple times a month.
Two questions. One is on it's not in this housing element report. It was discussed about the higher need for efficiencies in one bedrooms. So question is that like what came first? So is it that people that there's definitely a need for that, or that's who's coming here because that's what we have or don't have. And then the other question is, how have we been doing on the second unit, progress there, and then what would be the bigger challenges on the third unit option that's discussed?
Yeah, so in terms of the SROs and efficiency units, I think that similar to the discussion that we had tonight about these fairly low-cost accommodations, it's going to be an important, pathway for for housing development, affordable housing development into the future. We can't rent restrict every single unit that's built. And right now, the cost of construction is so high in California that not a lot is getting built. And really, in order to make money at building units, there's kind of two primary approaches. One is to build something that's ultra luxury that you're going to mark up considerably above what it costs to build that thing, and the other is to get involved in a tax credit or some other incentive program that allows some subsidy to come into the project. It's really hard to build market rate housing right now, is what we're finding out. We're going to collect more of this data to be able to present to you as we go forward. And so efficiency units or single room occupancies, very small units, are one method for reducing the cost per unit, because you're costing it based on the square footage. And so we've seen, Eureka, or sibling to the south there, adopted similar provisions in their code that allow for super small units to be included. And if you include one of those super small units, in fact, they went the extra step and said you didn't have to provide parking for it because they were creating market rate affordable. that's one thing I think that we need to take into consideration is how do we develop more market rate affordable, and that's one pathway to doing it. The other is to, consider, alternative types of housing. We have what I would consider commons, the Marsh Commons, where they have some common space, and that was a really creative idea on how to, it was more a philosophical housing project in a lot of ways. But what we've seen since then is a lot of jurisdictions like in Seattle and Portland areas that are, have way bigger affordability problems than we have. They're having, basically co-housing situations. And so I think we really need to take into consideration all of the ideas that there are out there for creating market rate affordable housing. And it's probably going to mean changing some of the ways that we've historically approached zoning. What I mean by that specifically is a co-housing situation where you might have, say, 10 or 15 people living in one unit that are unrelated. There's historically have been some prohibitions from having that sort of housing in our code. And so if we wanted to venture into that, there might be other amendments that we have to make to allow for that and that aren't in conflict with the code. But I think we need to get creative, and I think that there is a need for it. It's not just that we built it and so people came to it. People are coming to it because there's a huge market demand for that type of housing.
Yeah, and then on the follow-up on the second unit, how that's going. But also, there was some excellent research recently about some projects they're doing in Europe, and in the U.S. also, where they're having, they have homes for older people, and then they have college students that live there, and they get some kind of deal and stuff, but they've said it's been really good for both parties. And creating some, some affordable housing, but some really complements of the two groups, and it sounded pretty interesting.
We do have some fledgling programs like that going on right now, and that was a concept that did come up a couple of years ago out of some of the housing work we did. My understanding is that it hasn't really taken off, but there is a little bit of that going on. And then the second units, we're still, producing, roughly, 10 or so on average second units a year. You think it's higher? Joe's giving me the thumbs up. We're going to go a little higher on that. I don't have the exact number, but approximately 10 fewer than 20 per year. The cost of producing those units, I think we need to take a close look at if we want to make second units and third units a viable option in our community. I think we really need to take a look at the cost feasibility for the private side to actually develop those things, and to make sure that we're right sizing our fees and requirements for that type of housing unit if we want to see those. And it could mean relaxing the standards as well. What is what are we going to allow for? What are we going to accept as a living space? Right now, we wouldn't allow for a living space that, didn't have full sanitary and cooking facilities, to be occupied as a second unit. Joe, I think, is a huge fan of the junior units, and do you want to talk a little bit about what junior units are?
Junior ADUs, or accessory dwelling units, is a term, and it's basically a third dwelling unit, but it doesn't have a kitchen associated with it. And so that's a concept that's being floated not only locally, but at the state level as well. And, some jurisdictions are doing it by right. So you could have a primary dwelling unit, an accessory dwelling unit, and then a junior ADU, or junior accessory dwelling unit.
What about a bathroom?
I believe that most of them would have their own bathroom facilities. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's, you do see a trend where in certain urban areas where they'll have, maybe they're converting motels, and, where when you rent a room, basically it's a room, and people go out to dinner, and there might be a little refrigerator in there, but really there's no kitchen facilities other than something to make coffee or tea. Well, they're finding like they can convert those to residential units and still not have a kitchen, but they might have a very small kitchenette, might not meet really the California building code, but they'll have dining facilities located, and I know that some businesses are popping up that will market directly to those, knowing that there's a concentrated residents there that don't have cooking facilities. So they have the food trucks, they have delivery systems, and they'll deliver food to those places, and they've been pretty successful.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. What you mentioned one time, one of the questions you asked about was the policies in the 2014 housing element to go to those smaller units, and I'd say that we haven't done so well with the single room occupancy or the efficiencies other than the Arcata Bay Crossing, but we have seen a trend of smaller studio apartments and one bedroom, and that's something that some people might see as a good sign, or is it one that are we creating too many of those? So what is the balance? What about the large family units, the extended families, that maybe need more than 3 bedrooms, and are we losing those? At one time, there was the Land Use and Development Guide, there's a development standard floor area ratio, and that's kind of the bulk and mass of a structure. If you had 3 bedrooms or more, then you did not have to meet the floor area ratio requirements. So there was a built-in incentive to build those larger units, and it seems like we're getting a trend away from that a little bit now. If it's student housing, sometimes it's a larger detached structure or something like that. We might see a 4-bedroom, 4-bath, and right away it's like, looks like a student rental on that one. But
do we know of any HSU dorm projects in the works?
I believe I will likely be able to update you more on that as we move through the housing element. I believe the university was considering doing a replacement dorm project that then turned into an addition dorm project that is now, I think, currently on hold.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions or comments?
I was just curious if you could tell me a little bit more about those fledgling programs of the mixed demographics. Do we have any currently in the making?
Yeah, there's actually a program that is active where students are being paired with seniors. But my understanding is that there's not been a whole lot of interest at this point. That the program isn't, very robust at this point. I have to apologize. I don't have the details with me right now as to who's organizing or running that program. But I know that that it's in existence right now.
And interest on which side? Students or the elder folks, or both?
Excuse me?
You said there wasn't much interest. Was it students weren't interested in that kind of housing?
I don't know why the program isn't more popular than it is currently. I just know that there aren't a lot of participants in it.
Yeah, and I do know the couple that I read about, it was partially, like for the students, it was partially subsidized. They did some work there. Maybe I think they cooked dinner sometimes and did some things, and that helped offset it. So, we're talking about students that, are under maybe financial duress, and it seemed like a pretty nice option.
And to piggyback on that, I believe that there was some senior housing that was in jeopardy of being closed, and so they were able to keep open. I believe this was in maybe Norway. And so what they were able to do is pair the student population, and they were able to lower their rental fees by, they would have to participate so many days a month of taking the elders for walks, sharing dinners, those kinds of things. And it seemed like a really successful program, a great sociological it was really interesting, and it seemed like both populations really thrived, and it was able to keep the housing open and supply the deficit in student housing.
Great. Anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a little bit about kind of the mechanics of pulling the housing element together. And my understanding was that the 2019 housing element was pretty much going to be done in-house and not by consultants. Is that?
No, we've hired a consultant, Placeworks, who's done, I believe, something like 10 housing elements already this cycle, to help us with the heavy lifting. Our staff are stretched about as thin as you can possibly stretch them. And so we did want to make sure that we were very involved in particular, the public outreach component and sort of driving the bus. To make sure that we didn't just get some off-the-shelf, housing element that, yeah, sure, it's going to pass, pass the certification standards, but that, didn't really reflect the city of Arcata. So we're working with Placeworks to be able to, put together the technical information necessary to get a certified housing element. We're working with the local facilitator, Heather Equinos, to do some of the public outreach and engagement that she's organizing and managing that. And every single staff member in our department has been involved in these pop-up meetings. They're doing a terrific job of, taking shifts and getting out there after work hours to, make sure that we get the word out to the community. And so it's a team effort between our consultants and staff.
You mentioned before about the schedule for when the drafts are going to be circulating. Could you remind us?
Yeah, so I don't have the exact dates on the top of my head, but I can tell you that we are going to be we're going to be right under the wire. It's going to be basically the formal commission meetings will be happening in November when we're reviewing the complete document and making a recommendation, and the city council will be adopting it in December. To get in under the wire for the December 30th deadline for to retain our 8-year cycle. If we don't meet that deadline, if we don't have a certified housing element before December 31st, 2020, or at least one that's adopted by the city council and forwarded to the HCD for review, then instead of being on an 8-year cycle, we go into a 4-year cycle. And I can tell you from experience that a 4-year, even a 5-year cycle, which is what we run before, as soon as you get done with the housing element, you're starting over again. The region-wide, we decided to move to an 8-year cycle to reduce the cost and the burden, the resources locally to produce these required housing elements. So that's our timeline. We're pretty compressed timeline. We're working really fast to get to it. You'll see, before then, you'll see publicly noticed meetings, though, at the Planning Commission so that we can have any public members that we're engaging with out there in the community that are starting to build interest and want to provide formal recommendations to the Planning Commission for their review. You'll see those meetings happening sometime starting in October.
Okay, so it sounds like basically we're going to have no more than 2 meetings at which we would be reviewing the draft housing element. Is that correct?
I wouldn't necessarily say that, but certainly the number of meetings that you'll see the entire document in one place altogether, probably the last couple of meetings in November and first meeting in December probably, I think is what it is.
Anything else? Okay. Is that it from you on the housing element? Okay. And
I still have an hour and a half, but I'll spare you.
Yeah. All right. I think we're done then. Correspondence and communications. Anything? You've already pitched your online survey for the housing needs in Arcata. We'll see you at pop-up meetings. Thank you all. Good night.